Okay, that's going to start recording now. Okay, right, Alice. So for the purpose of the recording, we are now going to go through we're going to start looking at the managing self assignment. So we've looked through a lot of the session 1 e-learning. So time management techniques, prioritization techniques, things like that. We've also looked at what self-awareness is, why feedback is important. We've looked at the 360 SWOT analysis. We are in the process of putting together a personal development plan on the back of that. And we've also looked at session 2 e-learning to do with bias and unconscious bias. So we can just start to look through this now. So the first question is, what is self-awareness? So what do you think self-awareness is, Alice?
So self-awareness is being aware of sort of who you are in a person, I guess, in terms of sort of being a manager, kind of how you are as in sort of your personality and your learning style and all these different factors that affect how you are in any given situation. So the workplace in this instance.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a variety of things that influence that and sort of categorize it as well. So
there is. So one of the resources, or there's a model called the Johari window, which we looked at. It's all about self-perception, how you perceive yourself, things that you might know about yourself that others might not know, things that other people do know about you, but also, which can sometimes be the most eye-opening one in terms of feedback, is a perception of you of other people that you aren't aware of. And particularly with informal conversations and things like one-to-ones or appraisals, when constructive kind of feedback is given, it can sometimes be that side of things which kind of makes you sit up and think, wow, is that how people perceive me? And sometimes it can be a positive thing, sometimes it can be caused to think, well, maybe that's an area that I can develop on. And all of these things, along with doing things like having formal and informal conversations with members of staff, with managers, with family and friends about self-development. It's all about having that self-awareness to then take on information or feedback on board, and knowing really how to apply it. What am I going to do with this information? Am I going to go away and learn how to do something new? Sometimes it might be due to needs of the business as well as. So your line manager might come to you and say, look, I'd like you to start doing this task. And you might think, I don't know too much about that. So I'm going to have to go away and research it and learn about it, and able to then train staff on it. And that's taking accountability for your own learning so that you can then help develop other staff as well. So that self-awareness is really, really key. That self-reflection, how you might look back on tasks as well. I don't know whether you do that at the moment, Alice, where you might complete a task or a day's work and you might then think, could I have done that better? Could I have done it differently?
Yeah, it's definitely part of I think it's almost as ingrained as my personality as well as my work ethic, is that I'm quite self-critical anyway. So I've found that particularly since I've stepped into sort of a management role, I'm very aware of things that are sort of weaknesses of mine, and sort of reflecting at the end of the day on how I've sometimes let those weaknesses get the better of me, or, especially like, as I mentioned in my CDP, one of my really big weaknesses is time management. I am quite easily distracted by jobs or, even just conversations and things that I'd much rather be doing than the task at hand. Especially because now I spend so much time on my laptop, and I came into Go8 to sort of spend time out in the forest. So learning to juggle that workload, but also get my jobs done, but in a way that kind of works. Yeah, that reflection has been really, really important for me. So
excellent. And that's part and parcel of the job, the learning experience on the job, I guess, as well. And learning how to work with people, with different people. So we mentioned about learning styles before. We're also going to cover communication styles and leadership styles in the next couple of assignments as well. Okay, so we've already mentioned a few of those, Alice, but what tools do you think you can use to become more self-aware?
So I've been doing, since I sort of just before I started the apprenticeship as well, but I've been using SWOTs, sort of strength weaknesses, that I've been using that format to go through both myself personally. I've done a couple with my line manager and how, to sort of manage my own self-critical nature. Sort of Tony is quite a good buffer at that. So it helps me kind of not just sort of delve into like incredibly negative lines, which I sometimes do. So that's been really beneficial. I've also been doing a lot of sort of learning style questionnaires and personality questionnaires and things that have kind of made me more aware. So I've known my Myers-Briggs personality for years. I've been INFP for as long as I can remember, but I do try and touch in with that every now and then, just to make sure that sometimes things change. Your life is constantly a spectrum of how you exist. So making sure you sort of touch base with yourself and don't assume that your self-awareness has kind of reached that peak of I know myself perfectly, because you just don't. So I try and touch in with Myers-Briggs. And then there was the one in my CDP in my first one. One of the personality tests that I did as part of session 1 was quite enlightening. It kind of put into words how I thought I was, but it kind of solidified that and made it, funnily enough, it was about me being a reflector, but it gave me the opportunity to reflect on how that actually manifested, because it kind of put it in a way that I hadn't really considered before.
Okay.
Which made me feel more positive about it, because I do, as I've mentioned multiple times, I do get quite self-critical. So it made me realize that actually I should just lean into this, because it's beneficial to me to lean into my own styles rather than being like, I don't think this is good. Because I think in that particular sort of style, I think sort of actively engaging sometimes to me feels like the way I should be doing things, but on reflection, I'm more of a reflector, so I should do things that way instead. And cut myself some slack about doing it because it works better for me. Which I think has been one of the more useful things I've sort of discovered in the last couple of months going through the learning.
Okay, excellent. That's really really good, Alice. That's kind of the point in the course as well. It's not just a tick box exercise. It's hopefully that these resources and this building of kind of learning, and progression will help you within your job role and career path. It's not just a certificate that you can have at the end. It's actually usable skill sets that we're building. So that's really good to hear. And you're absolutely right as well. So these are all tools that you can use, one-to-ones with staff, one-to-ones with managers, appraisals, performance management reviews, things like that. These are all things that you can use to gain a kind of feedback and constructive feedback, in order to make them more informed decisions on how you move forward, how you can develop yourself. Again, it might be individual preferences, it might be needs of the business. But those are all things that you can use. And actually, if we go to the bottom couple of questions, you kind of answered that within that explanation. So, in what ways do you reflect on your performance? In what ways and from whom do you ask for feedback? So again, managers, staff, and it's interesting to do that as well from managers, staff, friends and family, because they can often you can be perceived in different ways by different groups of people. Depending on the dynamic of the group, or what job role you have, or what kind of skill set or personality lends itself to certain situations, and how people see you in certain situations. So that's quite interesting to get different bits of feedback from people as well.
Yeah, it's always been quite important to me since I sort of stepped into management. So my first sort of management role was when I was an instructor at Cannock, a different Go Ape site, and I was a duty manager there. And even from sort of, when that was literally just like make sure the day runs. Like there was no sort of need at that point to sort of further my management career, because I thought that's what I was going to be for a while anyway. Making sure that I knew what the staff thought of me and how I was doing was always really high up. Because I wanted to make sure that I was a manager that they were happy with, because I also know that my line managers will tell me if I'm falling short, if I'm not happy, whatever. If they're not happy with me, even, like, I've always been graced with managers who are very upfront about that information. Luckily, it's not a conversation I've had to have too often, but I have sometimes found that staff will quite often talk amongst themselves about how unhappy they are with a manager, or how they feel like things aren't fair or whatever, or they didn't like this, that, or whatever. So actively engaging with my staff and making sure that they are not only comfortable but happy to come to me with any kind of feedback, positive or negative. And there's been times where my staff have been quite upfront with me this year in ways that I didn't necessarily see happening, but it has ultimately helped, saying things like, you're not strict enough, you're being biased towards this member of staff, things that I didn't realize I was doing. But they're equally as nice, like, thank you for having my back with that customer or whatever. But I think sometimes the more negative stuff they don't always want to bring up for fear of some kind of retribution from the management team. But I think I think having that sort of honesty from staff is probably the most important thing, because at the end of the day you're kind of looking after them. So to me, that's really important.
Definitely. And there's actually a question in one of the future assignments. It might be communication or it might be team building, but it's how do you set a fair, consistent, respectful example? And that's a really good example of how you do that you're valuing people's opinion. So as a manager or a team leader, you're not just thinking, well, kind of my way is the best way.
I'm above them, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And people need to follow. So that's a really good not attribute, I can't think of the word, but that's part of being a really effective leader, because we know
it's certainly not an attribute. If I could shy away from it, I would. But it's something I endeavour to include, because it does make me uncomfortable, but it's not about me in that instances. It's about what needs to be said and heard by my team. So
I think that alone, and if people recognise that in certain situations that is uncomfortable for you, you need to kind of step out your comfort zone to facilitate progress for other people. I think that leads to a lot of kind of trust and respect within the team, and that's a really positive thing to have within a culture, because there is a big difference between being a leader and being a manager. Sometimes a leader doesn't always make the best manager, and vice versa. And so it's really great that you've kind of have the self-awareness to be able to kind of invite that feedback. And as well, if we think about, you mentioned a couple of times where you've had that what might be perceived as negative feedback, but actually in terms of if it's done properly, can be quite a constructive process. But imagine if you're not somebody who gives any feedback, or imagine in that scenario that you weren't given any feedback at all. So often the fact is that even if you receive feedback that might be perceived as negative, it's actually better than having no feedback at all, because it allows you to take on board that information and then do with it and then apply it and learn and grow and develop as you want to as well. So I think it's all of these businesses that kind of implement I'm sure you have like formal and informal conversations with a lot of your staff every day, but it's so important to have kind of these formal kind of monthly one-to-ones or reviews, or to take some kind of time out of your schedule every month to catch up with people properly, to have these key conversations, because the effect that it can have on team dynamic is huge, which you've identified, Alice. Absolutely. Okay. So the next one that we've got, so we've just touched upon bias there. So we've just gone through this as well. So what's your understanding of unconscious bias?
Unconscious bias is the kind of stereotypes, thoughts, sort of opinions we have of people based on characteristics about them, be them perceived characteristics or like the reality of their characteristics, protected characteristics or otherwise, that influence our decisions regarding them, or thoughts regarding them. So, the example I used earlier is like, I'm not going to give this job regarding a computer to an older member of staff, because clearly older people are not good with computers. Whereas, that's not necessarily the case. It's just a bias that you might have. Well, I suppose that's more of a deliberate bias, but like unconscious bias are things that are more ingrained in society, like perhaps women can't do as physical jobs, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And we said, didn't we? So the effect and the things that can happen when there is unconscious bias in the workplace, what that can lead to. So feelings of discrimination, worst case scenario, like feelings of like bullying,
Yeah, absolutely.
like discrimination, um, you know, this kind of thing. So cultures that don't accommodate everybody, that aren't inclusive, can become a real issue within team culture, within team dynamic. If somebody's feeling alienated or left out, it's important that that gets addressed and that you
Yeah,
talk through
definitely.
that.
And then there's the practical things as well. It's like if you're allowing a bias to maybe stop you assigning tasks to certain people, you might never learn that they're really good at it, or you might lose the opportunity to upskill people. So again, going back to sort of maybe that sort of misogynistic bias, we've got lots of women in our team who, may not get the opportunity to do more physical jobs like, helping build fences and stuff, because there's an unconscious bias within the management team, maybe that the sort of bigger, broader men are more suited to it. So we might lose the opportunity to upskill members of staff and have them feel that reward that they're getting trusted with that kind of thing. Just to sort of pick a bias that might implement the workplace here. But it's got, obviously the effect on culture is massive, and having come into a site in a management position where that bias was having quite a big impact on the culture, and having seen that change over the 12 months, it is really, really important. But you're sort of losing out on the, that bias can hold back members of your team as well. So that's equally as important, obviously. So
Yeah, very much so. So we've mentioned upon it a couple of times already, Alice, as well. But the next question is, what is inclusivity? So what's inclusion, and why do you think it's important to promote this within your team, within a business?
So yeah, inclusivity is it's one of those things, like, you just want to say being inclusive, but it's making sure that you have sort of a culture and a workplace that is sort of not only accepting is the sort of bare minimum of people of all different kinds of backgrounds, cultures, religions, sexuality, gender. It's all those kind of the protected characteristics of the legal bit of it, but it is a nice sort of succinct way of summing it all up. But sort of that is at the bare minimum accepting of all those things, but ideally it sort of is positive and like loving, because that inclusivity, if you have an inclusive team, you open yourselves up to so much more sort of opportunity, and sort of, well, the culture's better. I just keep wanting to say it feels more inclusive, and that's not the point of the question. But yeah, so inclusivity is the sort of, not sort of accepting that people are sort of different in lots of different ways, but sort of seeing that that's not a bad thing.
I think you're right, Alice, as well. So
in layman's terms,
it's not just necessarily accepting that. It's celebrating it and promoting it,
exactly.
and saying, look, we recognise that this is important to you, so therefore it's important to us. So you're seeing members of staff as people, not just as members of staff, not just as employees. And if you can make people feel kind of valued and in that respect, then you're gonna get a really productive workplace. Hopefully, of the old adage that a happy employee is a productive employee, kind of thing. But it also makes for a really nice workplace. We also spoke about the importance of education a little bit earlier as well, from this perspective, and
absolutely.
and communicating this to everybody as well.
Yeah. So it's been really helpful. I feel like I'm aware of some elements of inclusivity, sort of EDI training, more than others. Sort of just through the experiences that I've personally lived, has been a necessity for me to be more aware of that. But coming into GoApe and then seeing that the company realised that that was a shortfalling of their training, and they've actively implemented manager specific training in a sort of diversity and inclusion, and they're also now, as of sort of this year, extending that out to instructors as part of their basic core training as well. Which, you know, it's just massively improving the sort of knowledge base within the teams. So with that knowledge comes less ignorance, and with that less ignorance comes an increase to inclusivity, which is only a good thing.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so next section, Alice, will be this is a little bit more about how you structure your day, a little bit about time management. We spoke about there was a funny name of a model called Eat That Frog that we looked at before, with the funny American guy talking about the ABCDE. So we'll look at that a little bit like now. So how do you plan your daily activities, Alice?
So I've actually been using the ABCD method a lot, because again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things I really struggle with is sometimes prioritizing the jobs that aren't important but I know will be more fun or engaging for myself personally. So things like doing repairs out on the course, which anyone could do, but I just, again, don't want to be sat at my laptop. So yeah, sort of sitting down, sort of going through my day at the start of each day. Some days I'll come in and I'll know what I need to get done. And the job is so sort of dependent on like customer flow and things like that. Like some days I'll need to come in and just make sure that the day happened, like the customers all come in, everything happens, everything flows. And then other days I'll need to do like a PPE stock take and things like that. So sort of knowing when I've got that sort of breathing space to do more of my sort of extra workload as a manager versus when the company just needs me to make sure the day runs has been quite important. But yeah, this time of year, I've just got a sea of jobs in front of me, and knowing which ones need to be done when, and sort of figuring out my calendar. Like I've got like sort of big printed out calendars with sort of important dates on and things, so that I can help me visualize things like that. But yeah, sort of sitting down and assigning like A, B, C, D in list of importance helps me manage that. But I've also found, knowing that my sort of engagement and learning styles is generally more practical, that if I sort of say like, okay, I'm going to do this for an hour and a half, if I haven't finished it at that point, or, you know, if I have finished it, I'm going to go away and do something a bit more practical, sort of stretch my legs, get that job done, and then for 20 minutes, and then come back to sort of sitting and going through Excel documents and stuff. And I think that has helped me manage my time more effectively. But not only that, sort of manage my sort of, I don't want to say mental health, but kind of how I feel coming into work, because it can be kind of like, oh no, I know I've just got to sit and stare at the computer for 8 hours today. And it again, it's not what I initially signed up for with the company. So having the sort of space to be like, okay, well, I am going to go and do something a bit more practical, it keeps me engaged for the rest of the day, and therefore I'm less likely to get distracted. So I think just sort of being aware of that in terms of my time management has made me more efficient in terms of my time, because even though I'm not necessarily sort of just busting through the jobs that need to be done, I do get them done more effectively and quicker. So yeah, I think that's been interesting. I mean, I've only really had a chance to implement that this week. But already I can kind of see how that's, you know, I'm using my time better. Rather than
so not only from a so by considering kind of how to manage well-being, you're also managing and finding an impact on productivity in a very positive way, which is excellent. And that's managing your own mindset. That's recognizing, you know, what schedule, or what, you know, how I manage my day, what's gonna give me the most positive mindset to then be productive in certain situations. So that's more that self-awareness as well.
So there's absolutely days where I need to sort of sit and just like endlessly do data input, and I don't like those days, but they are days that need to happen.
Indeed.
So yeah, sort of, I think it's just been really, really useful for me to kind of sort of that eat the frog mentality. Like some things just need to happen, so I just need to stop putting them off.
And I think alongside that, I think you take out of that how can I apply that to me? It's because it can become quite subjective into how you use it. For example, the actual model suggests that you always get the most important task done first, whereas in certain jobs like yours, that's not that can't be the case. If you need to do like an end of week report on a Friday, well, you're not gonna do that on a Monday morning. So you recognize that is an important task to do, and you allocate time on a Friday afternoon to get that done, just like you do with data input and other things as well. So you're also using, on the simplest terms, kind of rota, so you know the days and times that you're going to be working. Mostly, generally the industry that you're in, when it's going to be busier and when it's not going to be busier. So that allows you to kind of time manage and look at that effectively as well. Not only for yourself, but also for your team, Alice, as well, because that's the next question. So how do you manage the time of others effectively? So kind of liaising with managers, liaising with staff. How do you allocate tasks? How do you delegate, for example?
Yeah, I am in charge of the rota, so sort of an awareness of when and so being in charge of the rota means that I have sort of a direct effect on how we use our time effectively. There's no point me rotating in all 20 staff members on a Monday when we've only got 4 customers. So yeah, making sure that time is used effectively. I also have to be honest with myself and be like, delegation is not one of my strong suits. It is something that both my line manager and myself have highlighted, that sometimes I am too keen to sort of make sure that the job is done properly, that I won't give it away to other people. So one of my responsibilities at the moment is I'm in charge of all the social, and it was agreed when I started in October 2021 that I would have a team of people to manage social media with me, and that team has never manifested because I've always been like, no, I got it, I'll do it, like, don't worry, I got this. And I have fallen short on KPIs because of it, because I've been busy with other things that only I could do. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm actually trying to work on, is kind of like be less protective over the things. I just need to learn to trust my team a little bit more with some of those things that I see as like my responsibility. But also there are times where I sort of get stuck in and do more practical jobs, not only because they're the kind of things that I enjoy doing, but because I want to be seen doing them. Because I don't want to be a sort of a manager who just is constantly tucked away in an office, hunched over a desk. Like, I want to be the kind of person that my team can see doing like the bin run, all the big manual tasks, because I don't want to just be like, yeah, you go and do that because I can't be asked. I don't want that to be the feeling. Which was fed back to me right when I started, that was the kind of manager I was. So I think that stuck with me a little bit. And so I just I have let it affect me to my detriment. So I'm actively trying to delegate more and make sure that it's delegated appropriately and fairly. So that's one of my sort of goals for 2023, not 2022. It's been gone.
That's it.
That's one of my goals for this year, is to sort of actively try and delegate more. There's a multitude of reasons that go into that, but essentially we had a very new team. There's a lack of experience, so I didn't want to complicate people's jobs more. But now we're getting to a position where they've settled into the roles of instructors. They can afford to take on a bit of additional responsibility, which means that I can then manage my time better by not doing those things, because I can share them out to people. And but going back to the rota, managing, making sure that in terms of effectiveness, managing the balance between making sure people get enough shifts to live on but not getting overworked is really important, especially in our peak season. Even coming down to like approving shift swaps is managing time effectively, because we had a couple of instances last year where someone agreed to cover shifts and it ended up that they were working for like 2.5 weeks straight without a day off. And like, we have like 12 13-hour days here quite often in the sun, like, 1 20-minute break in the middle. So making sure that I'm kind of monitoring other staff's well-being and things like that through their time management, I think has been really important. So I think those are the main ones. And then yeah, the other things are just like sort of in terms of assigning jobs to people, making sure that I assign it to people who can get the job done quickly and efficiently, but also not
Yeah.
robbing people of the opportunity to get upskilled and learn is quite a delicate balance. But I think that's an effective use of time, making
Yeah.
sure that that learning is happening within the team. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
things to think about, but I think it's something that I'm actively working on and hopefully getting better at. And feedback from my team seems to suggest so. I had some feedback from members of the team that the rota had been really well managed for the previous season, which was great to hear.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are the main things for me.
Okay, excellent. So that was, I was going to mention that point that you just made at the end there, Alice. So in terms of managing the time of others effectively, obviously being in charge of the rota, your job is to that you're going to have a budget to work with in line with that. So it's making sure that you're compliant with the needs of the business first and foremost.
Yeah, it's
But
going to be
also, you mentioned obviously, you know, making sure that everybody has the equal opportunity to learn and work and not be overworked as such. But you also mentioned with a relatively new team, that's going to take a little bit of time to get to know people, build relationships, build rapport, know the kind of skill sets that they've got to be able to then allocate tasks and have confidence and build trust in them, and they'll have trust in you as well. So you mentioned about delegation, that's part and parcel of, I think, team building and building a high performance team as well, building those relationships, building rapport with people, building trust. Once you get to know them a little bit more, what motivates them, you can understand how to lead them more effectively a little bit well, what they're capable of. As a result of that, a knock-on effect might then be your ability to then allocate training, needs, individual plans, team plans, and then eventually, you know, the ideal scenario would be that everybody has the same capabilities, everybody has the same, more or less the same skill set, so you can give any job to anybody.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah, you've answered those really well, Alice. So all in all, we've basically covered the entire assignment there.
Cool.
In terms of questioning. So I'm going to very much use this as evidence against that. Between now and the next session, you can probably make a start on that, Alice, as well.
Okay.
Just typing out some answers for that in line with what we've said.
Absolutely.
The reason why I like to record these sessions and actually do like in more interactive sessions is you don't always, when you see a question written down, you kind of just type down what you think. There's almost not barriers as such, but you just write down what you think should be what should be the answer. Whereas through discussions, you can expand on and get different examples, and that's really, really key. Is these behaviours that you can demonstrate, these examples of not only an understanding of how you of things, but how you apply them, but then practical examples of how you do that. And that's really the value in having these recorded discussions, not just now, but we're kind of thinking 12 to 15 months down the line when we do your endpoint assessment. These are the type of conversations, these are the type of practical examples that you can use. So when we get to EPA, we're going to revisit this conversation and replay it, and we can say, right, we'll use that example and we'll use this example, and that's exactly what we'll do. So the written assignments, of course, there are 9 of them. They're going to make up a big bank of evidence, but also I think these recorded discussions to go alongside them, whether we preview them or whether you finish the assignment and then we review them and talk about it, are going to be really, really important, because we're looking at long-term planning and organisation. For in 15 months' time, we're going to reap the benefit of doing this now when it comes to the endpoint assessment. So excellent. Right, I'm going to pause the recording there, Alice.